The FDA is poised to give the go ahead for booster shots, but only for certain groups. The breathtaking speed of the Taliban's Blitz in Afghanistan, and Jeopardy gets its new host and satisfies no one in the process. Thursday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for Thursday, August 12th. I am Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Carlo, good morning.
Will Jagner coming from her own bunker today. Good to see you. How are you?
I'm okay. Unfortunately, somebody in my daughter's camp group has tested positive for COVID, which we've been talking about, right? That just more and more kids are being impacted by this virus. So she is in quarantine. It is basically the end of her summer now because camp was only another week and a half. My husband and I had a vacation plan for next week that is currently canceled. And that is it. We are no longer, grandparents can't go near her for a week and a half. It's just, this is what it is. And hopefully, knock on wood, she won't actually get COVID. And they're just being extra precautious. But it's really scary. We're back to really scary times, as you and I have been talking about. And unfortunately, it's hitting home for me right now.
I'm sorry to hear that. We have got to get these vaccines authorized in children, don't we? What is the holdup, along with the other holdup of just the full authorization? I mean, I don't know. I'm not an FDA scientist, but it certainly seems like they should be working as hard as possible to get this done now.
I think they are, but I think the bigger point is we didn't have to get here. We had adults,
sure.
Us grown-ups could have controlled this thing on our own. So let's get to the latest on the pandemic now. The FDA is expected to authorize booster shots for immunocompromised people as soon as today. The amended emergency authorization would allow adults with weakened immune systems to get a third dose of the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines to give them extra protection against the Delta variant. About 3% of the population is considered immunocompromised, including those undergoing cancer treatment, living with HIV, as well as organ transplant recipients or those taking certain immunosuppressive drugs. The FDA will explain exactly who should get a third shot probably later today.
Meanwhile, over at the CDC, they are now unambiguously and strongly recommending that pregnant women get vaccinated. So that puts the CDC in line with the recommendations from most of the leading OBGYN groups now, including ACOG. And there is this sort of growing body of evidence that the antibodies are indeed passing from vaccinated mothers to their infants in the breast milk. So that's all very good news. I just mixed up something when I was listening to the pod yesterday. I talked about how the epicenter was currently in the Southwest. It's obviously the Southeast, so I misspoke there. I'm sorry. But the hospital numbers in the Southeast are really telling sort of a fascinating story here. Look at some of these numbers. The number of people under 18 who are hospitalized in that region up 88% since January. In the 18 to 29 cohort, they're up 100%. 30 to 39, they're up 121%. 40 to 49, they're up 89%. Over 70, though, down 45%. Again, it's just more evidence about the vaccines, right? More older folks are vaccinated. They are going to the hospital less. Younger folks are less vaccinated. They are going to the hospital more. The good news, to the extent that that's good news, is that, even if you're hospitalized as a younger person, you're less likely to die.
One of the things that I just wanted to mention about booster shots, and again, we're going to wait for guidance on who can and should get them. A couple of experts, though, that I've been listening to have said you don't necessarily look at a booster shot as a quote unquote booster shot. You might just want to look at it as the third vaccine in the vaccine regimen. It might just be that this is a vaccine that needs 3 shots to just give you that total protection. We don't know, right? I mean, they are relatively new. As we've been saying for a while, it might be the type of thing where you do need to get it every year, like a flu shot. It might be, though, that just 3 vaccines is enough, right? You get your first 2 doses. Yeah. About a year later, 6 to 12 months later, you get that third dose. And for now, at least with Pfizer and Moderna, it's looking like the booster is the exact same thing as the original. Both of those companies are looking to tweak the formula a bit and maybe cater it more towards the Delta variant. But for now, if you do go and get a booster, it's the same thing.
Yeah. There's also, I just read a report, there's about 1 million people in this country who have actually already gotten their third doses without any authorization. They're just like, give me as many antibodies as I can get, right? Put them in my arm. By the way, you shouldn't do that unless it's authorized.
California also imposing the country's first vax or test rules for teachers ahead of the new school year. All K through 12 teachers and staff at both public and private schools will be required to show proof of vaccination or submit to weekly testing. And that includes everyone from the janitor up to the principal.
I saw this yesterday. I got to say, I give Gavin Newsom credit here, just given how this is probably going to fuel those who really want to recall him. And he did it anyway, because in my opinion, it is the right thing to do. The one question with the testing is, I was thinking about this in terms of our own workplace. Like if you're gonna say people can opt out of the vaccine, but they have to get tested, who pays for that test? Does the company? Is it on the employee's time to go? And to go get it and show it? I don't know the answer to that. There's a million ways to do it now because we have these at-home tests, but it's just something that popped into my mind. Also, just on the school front, students already returning to class in many states in the South, including Florida and Texas, where the COVID situation way worse than it is in California. Several school districts in those states defying their respective governor's orders and mandating masks now. Broward County in Florida, the latest to do it. Dallas and Texas, both Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis in those states, I think, really overplayed their hands here, I think, with these mask mandate bans earlier this summer. And they just didn't change their tune once Delta started spreading. And I think they're going to pay a political price for it now.
Yeah, it's looking like even some ardent Republicans and Trump supporters are kind of turning on them, and DeSantis in particular, just saying this is crazy. And I think it's that emotional thing of just wanting to protect our kids. I when I went to go pick up my daughter, we had to get her from camp early yesterday. I mean, I almost started to cry just at all the parents were there picking up these kids are defenseless. I mean, we're basically, even when they wear masks, honestly, it's they're not really wearing them properly. Sure. And like I said, I just the thought of my daughter getting this virus, it's keeping me up at night. Statistically, kids are doing pretty well. But I mean, here we are. All right, Carlo, let's talk a little bit about just this extreme weather that we're getting. It may be getting darker earlier, but summer is still in full effect in the Northern Hemisphere. About 200 million Americans are currently under some type of heat advisory. The Pacific Northwest is in the midst of its sixth heat wave of the year, with temperatures 10 to 20 degrees above average. That is not good news for the firefighters battling the dozens of fires out west. And if you think it's miserable here in the United States, at least we're not in Southern Europe. Sicily just reporting a high of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. If confirmed, this would be the hottest temperature ever recorded on the continent.
And staying on the extreme weather beat for a bit here, Tropical Depression Fred is now churning in the general direction of Florida and the Gulf Coast after making landfall in the Dominican Republic as a tropical storm yesterday. This thing, it's sort of disorganized, but the latest models have it re-strengthening, and it's going to sort of skirt up the western coast of Florida this weekend and then potentially making a landfall along the Panhandle or the southeastern Gulf Coast early next week. So if you're down there, just keep your eyes peeled. It's a little too early to say exactly where this thing's going. Also, Fred, not a good name.
So we briefly mentioned the massive fires happening in California, the Dixie Fire, which is still raging, the state's largest single fire in recorded history, and unfortunately showing no signs of stopping. I read a great op-ed yesterday in the New York Times. It's from Farhad Manjoo, and it's about the future of California, a state that is known for its great weather. And I just wanted to read a little bit here. So he starts by saying that Hollywood was actually originally in New Jersey, which I didn't know. But by the end of the 1910s, he says the budding film industry had packed up and moved to California. Why? Well, scholars cite several reasons, but most accounts include an obvious one. The earliest movie cameras required lots of light, so films were often shot outdoors or on open-air sets. Unlike gloomy Northeast, Southern California offered filmmakers year-round sun and a diversity of a striking landscape on which to dream up celluloid worlds, oceans, deserts, and mountains within easy reach, glory wherever you looked. In other words, Hollywood is in Hollywood rather than in West Orange, New Jersey, for many of the same reasons that California's Central Valley produces about a quarter of the nation's food, and why the Beach Boys wished for all of America to be like California. And it's the same reason that a lot of Californians first came here, and the reason why so many of us, despite everything, still can't help but stay. Sunshine and natural splendor. We're hooked not just on California's weather, pleasantly temperate and accommodating to seemingly any pursuit, but also the way life here feels defined just as much by what's outdoors as what's in. A state that lives by nature, though, risks dying by it too. In the last few years, as California battled heat waves and drought and fire, intensifying as the planet warms, I have found myself wondering about my home state's future and, in a deeper sense, its purpose. Is California still California when our weather becomes an adversary rather than an ally? What is California for when summertime, the season in which the Golden State once found its fullest luster, turns from heaven into hell? And he continues and he talks about just, they put up with things like the congestion and the pollution and nonstop traffic because in part of the weather. But I think the bigger question is a really good one. And it's something that you and I, Carlo, have talked about in a real sense. Will people pick up and leave, not just California, but other places that are really impacted by climate change? Like, how will climate change and this extreme weather change where all of us on Earth decide to live? In Australia, for example, 90% of the population lives on the coast. And if you think about us here in the U.S., we just keep building out coastal cities. Miami floods on a good day. And we have seen tons of people from the northern part of this country, like New York, recently flocking to that city, and others in the South, like in Texas. And what we have learned is that climate change is happening a lot quicker than even scientists had thought. So the question is that going to start fueling migrations? Are we going to just live differently? I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And it is a great point about California. I read that piece. A couple of people sent that to me yesterday. And I have family in California, and they've always said, like, hey, you guys got to move out here. It's the weather. It's 72 and sunny in LA every day. What's not to like? And I was always like, I actually like the seasons. But regardless of that, I think New Zealand. I think we all should just move to New Zealand. I feel like that's the place to sort of ride out the climate apocalypse. But in all seriousness, I mean, maybe you'll see places like the UP, right? The Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which I've heard, I've never been, I'm sure you have, is beautiful and is relatively protected from a lot of the extreme weather we see. Places like Montana, although not even necessarily, right? They deal with heat waves and drought also. So, yeah, it's a good question.
Overseas, the Taliban continues its blitz across northern Afghanistan, capturing its 10th provincial capital in a week. Now, U.S. intelligence officials are reportedly shocked at how fast the Taliban is moving to take over the country, some estimating that Kabul could now fall inside of a month. President Biden this week, though, saying nothing has changed with the U.S. policy of being completely out of Afghanistan by the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which is now less than a month away.
My God, it's the 20th anniversary of 9/11 in less than a month. I just realized that. That's astounding. Anyway, the Taliban now controls about 65% of the country, and that is only growing. Thousands of Afghans displaced. They're being driven into Kabul, where they're now sleeping in parks and these sort of like makeshift tent cities. It's going to be a sad day when Kabul falls, and just as sort of another reminder of what an incredible waste a lot of this war was. There are peace talks happening right now in Doha, Qatar, where Taliban maintains a sort of like political office. There's sort of this hope that maybe diplomacy will prevail and keeping them from, I don't even know what, because it's clear what's happening here. But the only silver lining I can think of here is that perhaps once the Taliban actually is in control and retakes Afghanistan, they're going to want to be seen as a legitimate government in the eyes of the world, I think, at least. And so hopefully what that means is that they're going to moderate a little bit, at least just a little, and maybe they won't go back to like killing women and girls just for reading, because that does not look very good on the world stage. But I'm grasping at straws here. I mean, this is obviously not a good situation, but that's my hope, I guess you could say, for the fall.
The reporting would counter that, because it looks like as they're taking over cities, they're even more brutal than they were previously. But as we mentioned, the speed at which the Taliban is taking over is surprising to even experts within our government and people who've spent a lot of time on the ground there. In part some are blaming the Biden policy where he basically set a departure date with absolutely no conditions. Most experts thought that there would be a civil war. No one really thought that there'd be this Taliban sweep of the entire country and that we would potentially see a Taliban flag flying in Kabul. But the test, I guess, will be, will the Afghan forces step up and really be able to defend the big cities like Kabul and Kandahar? Because it's not looking like Biden has any appetite to reverse course.
Yeah, and I still support that decision. I think that the answer to your question is probably sadly going to be no. I think these Afghan security forces just don't have what it takes.
To the economy, where inflation started to moderate in July a little bit, according to data from the Department of Labor, though prices on pretty much everything are still going up, just at a slightly lower rate. The inflationary landscape is, as one economist put it to the Wall Street Journal, quote, the equivalent of going from a 104 degree to a 101 degree fever. It's still elevated. It's just not quite as hot as what we saw in the prior 3 months.
That alone, enough to send the Dow and S&P to record highs yesterday. Basically the inflationary picture not being as bad as feared. By the way, on the lumber beat here, lumber down 70% from its peak. Pretty astounding fall there. So maybe it is time to do that deck you've been dreaming of. Get that lumber, put on that addition to your house, live your life, especially since we're probably going to be stuck in our houses for the next Lord knows how long, right?
Southwest Airlines, meanwhile, has a warning about the Delta variant's impact on the travel and leisure sector. The airline saying that it does not expect to turn a profit for the current quarter that ends in September. Southwest was profitable in June and July, but now predicts that the resurgence in COVID cases is going to keep it from repeating that feat for the quarter. Bookings, they say, have slowed. Cancellations are piling up. Frontier Airlines recently blamed COVID for a slowdown in bookings as well.
There was also some pretty enlightening credit card data from JP Morgan they put out this week showing that spending on things like restaurants and air travel is really starting to plateau or even actually decline again. So it's hard to know what to make of that because first of all, it's August, right? This would be when bookings start to decline because the summer's almost over for air travel at least, and restaurant reservations, I think in big cities, start to soften around now because a lot of people who make restaurant reservations are out of town. But it's something to keep an eye on, right? We were really on this upward trajectory in terms of consumer spending, and we may be sort of flatlining here. And as we know, Jill, you and I, that's what powers this economy we live in, people spending money.
And Jeopardy has announced its new host or hosts. Current executive producer Mike Richards will, in fact, be the permanent regular host. The game show is also making the actress Mayim Bialik host of its primetime specials, like an upcoming college tournament. Bialik is known for her roles on The Big Bang Theory and Blossom, or if you're of my demographic, Beaches. And she will become Jeopardy's first permanent female host. But Richards gets the daily gig, putting an end to the speculation over who's going to fill the late Alex Trebek's shoes. So basically, he hired himself. Actually, he didn't. I know that that's a funny line, but he has said, and the show has said, that he did not make this decision.
I'm surprised. I really didn't think he was going to get it. And man, people are not happy about this, are they? It seems like just about everybody has a problem with it. It sort of reminded me, I don't know if you remember from the election cycle last time when the New York Times came out with their big endorsement and they endorsed both Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar, sort of trying to satisfy everybody, and it ended up just pissing everybody off.
It was so lame. It was totally
lame. So lame. Yes, it was so lame. But I did think it was interesting how this was sort of framed in the press release that Jeopardy put out, as well as like the early reporting in the trades yesterday, because it was sort of headlined as though these two were going to, Bialik and Richards were going to sort of be the co-hosts almost, like they were going to rotate, that they were getting like equal footing. Then no, as you just said, like Richards is the guy who gets the big job. Bialik, I'm not that familiar with her, but she's just sort of doing these specials, and you never know with that, right? How long those will go on or how often they will be. It almost feels like a little bit of a consolation prize. Brian
Stelter in Reliable Sources, he wrote, Mike Richards predicted this moment would come. Back in May, he told interviewer Paige Albaniak about a conversation he had with a fellow executive producer, Michael Gelman, about the challenges of replacing an iconic TV host. Richards said Gelman advised him that whoever you pick will get beat up. It doesn't matter who it is, so that person has to be resilient. That was what happened to Drew Carey on The Price is Right, Richard said. He got destroyed for years, and at some point, everyone looked up and was like, oh, Drew Carey, I really like that guy. Well, that's exactly what will happen here. So I think that's the question, right? I mean, is this the type of thing where, they're playing the long game? Right. You got to do kind of like the 5-year test. Where are people on this, 5 years from now?
He's also this guy just sort of looks like sort of like the most least threatening. He's just this sort of like very bland, like white guy, just his look. And I don't mean that is sort of like derogatory or anything. I just mean like, he just kind of looks like almost like a Ken doll. But I know that he didn't actually give himself the job, but I got to say that was like, this is basically a 30 Rock joke. I feel like the 30 Rock jokes are starting to become real news here again. But I remember in one of the seasons, Jack Donaghy, played by Alec Baldwin, he creates a new show for NBC. He's talking about how, he's telling Liz, we saw hundreds of actors to play God. And finally, the network executives said, I should just play it. And then Liz says, you're the network executive. But
it's great. It's great. It's kind of like where we are at this moment, where even the Onion headlines are happening, which is just wild. Okay, we're going to leave it there. That is what you need to know for Thursday, August 12th.
See you guys tomorrow. And don't forget, tomorrow's the YouTube.